Hopefully you've seen some of these. So what I have on the screen now is one of our projects in the museum, and I want to talk about what role illustration plays in the museum. So, oops, let's go into this one. What role illustration plays in the museum as well as just in science. So this is a page from one of my sketchbooks, and this is one of the things that if you draw as a scientist, this is something you'll do a lot, which is taking notes. So one thing you can do in like a biology lab, or even if you're just out on a walk, is you can draw pictures of what you see. And it's a good way of recording very relevant details. Maybe you're outside and you see a bird and it flies away too fast to take a photo. You can do a really quick sketch, and that way you know what the parts are while it's still fresh in your mind. You can draw like an arrow to a certain bit and you can remember, oh, it has like a yellow neck, or certain features which will help you identify it later before you get into like looking at a ton of photos, which are going to then start clouding your mind with what you think it looked like versus what it actually looked like. So this is one way that a lot of people, a lot of biologists take notes and reference themselves, like the information that they have through drawing. But it's also a way that people can communicate out to other people. So this is a fish drawing. It's a fine scale dace, and this is going to be used in a fish identification app, which is yet to be released. So this is when someone with some taxonomic knowledge, and I'm working with Rick Taylor, our fish expert on this one, produces a drawing to help people identify organisms. And the advantage of a drawing here is that you can pick out certain characters over others to highlight and to have people pay attention to in particular. So in this case, what we're looking at is the position of the mouth versus the position of the eyes. So we can show it from very specific angles, and we can also isolate those characters. So that's where drawing comes in handy. And this is also just a quick aside on the different types of drawing that we do. So what most people are familiar with is sort of called raster imagery, which is up in the top left in the blue. And that's an image which is made up of pixels. So when you take a photo with your phone or a camera, or if you're in a program like Photoshop, what you're doing is raster drawing. And that is when you change the color of the different squares to be different colors, different shapes. The other way of doing it is vector. So the previous drawings we looked at were actually created as vector drawings. And that's where you can think of it like connect the dots. So you have a whole bunch of different dots, and those are all joined by lines, which are defined by equations. So the computer basically does a drawing. It does like a connect the dot every time you open up or scale the image. And that means you don't have the type of like pixelization that you would get if you blew up a raster drawing really big. So those are just two different types of illustration, and vector drawing can be really useful when you start getting into more like technical illustration. But we're not going to go there today. We're not going to do that. Maybe later. Let us know in a comment if you want to see that. But in the museum, specifically, we have exhibits that are primarily drawn, and this is one. This is part of our timeline. So if you've been to the museum, we have all of Earth's history as a really long bit, and then this is another piece which shows the last 542 million years since the Cambrian explosion. So this covers a whole bunch of different types of organisms and a whole bunch of different periods of time. So when you're dealing with that much variation, as well as with some things that you can't find anymore, like the ostracoderms, they're extinct, to have a sense of sort of consistency, what I wanted to do was to just illustrate these so that they would all look the same and they would all be like nice resolution and could print well. So sometimes when you have like a large group of things that you want to all represent in a very consistent manner, drawing is your best option versus trying to either take or source photos. There's also some instances, like I mentioned, where we don't have the thing. So this is an organism that's called Herdia Victoria, I believe, or Victoriana. So this is actually from the Burgess Shale in near Field, BC, sort of southeastern BC. And this organism was found in 2011. Or described in 2011. And I did this illustration in 2012 when we hosted Jean-Bernard Caron from the Royal Ontario Museum. He's one of the researchers who works primarily on the Burgess Shale. So when we have organisms that you can't find anymore, and where all we had were fossil remains, then drawing was a way to extrapolate what that animal might have looked like in real life. So there you have to use a bit of your imagination, but you also have to be true to what we know from the science. And that also goes for when we're doing things that are more imaginative or conceptual. So one thing that we do is we host talks by different scientists who come in and they present on the type of research that they do. So in this case, we had Paul Hébert, who was talking about digital biodiversity and the idea of taking a small chunk of DNA, like a DNA barcode from each organism, and using that to identify what things are out in the environment. So that's what's represented on the underwings of the beetle there. Those 4 colors, the red, green, black, and blue, represent the different bits of DNA, the nucleotides that are used in DNA barcoding. And then on the right, we have Peter Raven's lecture, which is about the future of plant survival. So I wanted to just get that across in like one single illustration using local species as well. So it was a way of getting an idea across, not just the idea of like what a specimen looks like, but more conceptual, more what's the topic and what are we talking about. And finally, this is actually a vector illustration, going back to the idea of vectors. This is actually something that we printed in the museum, and it was about 10 feet wide. So the great thing about vectors is you can blow them up really big and you don't lose the quality. So this is using a more computer-assisted type of illustration to do sort of a more immersive environment. And that's happening more and more with, say, 3D modeling, or for instance, we just had some 360 drawn environments that we're showing in the museum. So this is sort of where things might be going, is seeing larger and more computer generated recreations of the natural world. And so this is something that we're not gonna go too far into today, but it's somewhere where it's very exciting. And if you're interested in this type of illustration, maybe this is what we can progress to in the future. So I'm not going to delay too much. I really want to get to the drawing bit because that's the fun part. So the other bit I wanted to mention was if we do some drawings today and you'd like to share with us, that would be great. If you're on any of the social media platforms, if you hashtag things with Beaty Museum, then we'll be able to see them. And I would love to see what you come up with. So I'm going to stop screen sharing for the moment, and we're just going to go really quick over some materials. So hopefully you can still see me. So we're going to talk about what we're going to use today. So I'm going to be drawing digitally because then I think you will be able to see it better. But I also have a set of drawing pencils here, and I will open these up so you can see what's on the inside. So there are the pencils, and if you can see at the end, they all have a little number or a letter. So this goes at the top, it says 8B, and it goes all the way down through the B's. There's an F, and then there's some H's. And those are all different hardnesses of the lead at the end there. So usually what we would do is start in the middle, something like a B, maybe an HB, and that gives us like a medium weight line. And if we go into the larger B numbers, those are really soft, so they produce like a dark line. And then the H's are harder lead, so those would produce like a really fine line. But I actually haven't used these at all. What I use all the time is this. So this is my drawing kit that I take when I travel, and I'll show you what's inside. So in here, it is 3 pencils and an eraser. So this one is a 2B pencil. This is an HB pencil, and then I have a mechanical pencil because sometimes I don't want to sharpen if I'm going somewhere and I don't have time and I don't want to deal with pencil shavings. And the other thing that's in there is a kneadable eraser. So if you can see that, it looks like kind of a chewed up piece of gum. So this is a squishy eraser, and it picks up the graphite from the paper, and it doesn't give those little like eraser peelings that other erasers do. This one stays soft and flexible, and you can also reshape it. So you can make it into like a really clean edge, and then you can take like a little bit off of a drawing. So these are available in art supply stores. Some art supply stores are still open and you can do ordering, but also just like a white vinyl eraser works really well. And then the other thing to have around is a sketchbook. This is one of mine. I've had this one for years and years and years. And then these are great. The paper is fairly heavyweight. Let me find a drawing I can show you guys. It's not too embarrassing. Here's a hand. So this one has like, is that focusing? Here's one. This one has like a nice rough grain paper. It picks up the graphite really well. So if you have something like this, or even just some sheets of plain paper, we'll need like maybe 4 sheets of paper today to draw. So hopefully everyone has their equipment and something in front of them to draw. Kashifa, how are we doing out there? There have been any, I haven't seen any questions yet.
No questions, but there are some comments that last image you showed would make for great wallpaper.
It kind of was wallpaper, actually. It was like 10 feet wide. So maybe when we start producing museum wallpaper, we can propose that. But yeah, so I'm going to show you the setup that I'm using, and then we're going to get into some drawing. If anyone has any questions, feel free to throw them into the chat, and then hopefully Kashika can keep an eye on that for me because I can't see it too well when I'm on this thing. So I'm going to go back to screen sharing.
We can't hear you.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Hear. I could
be using Photoshop today, but I think the way that I'm drawing shouldn't be too specific to what system you're using. This is, it's not the best photo. It was just quick. This is what I've got. So this is the setup that I'm using. You can see there's a drawing tablet, which is in front of me. So I've got my pen, I've got my tablet here. I just didn't want to try to do this live. So I took the photo, and then you can see my computer there. So I'm going to be using a digital illustration system, but use whatever you've got and the principles will still apply. So I'm going to show you my canvas here. So this is the way that I am drawing. I'm going to make this a little bigger. Yeah, so you can see the top left is my subject. I do like pears, so we have more pears today. And I'm also going to be using my brush settings here. So let's see what I've got. So that's with my mouse, and then I'll do this with the tablet, and you can see the tablet has a more organic line. You can also see that, where's my brush palette? Oh, there it is, it's hidden. So I can also do my settings on my program so that it'll change the shape and it'll change the opacity. So now when I do it, I can get like a thin line and go to a thick line. I can also make it so that it doesn't go to like 100% dark when I'm in there. So did not realize how Zoom was going to obscure my working space. There we go. Nice clean palette. So hopefully you have like a still life subject in front of you, and you have a sheet of paper. So what I wanted to do is to do 3 really quick drawing exercises. And the purpose of these exercises is really to train your hand to coordinate with your eyes and to sort of skip the part of your brain that says, oh, this is what this thing should look like. I want you to be able to focus on what the thing actually looks like and the thing you see in front of you rather than any sort of thing that tells you what it's supposed to be. So the first thing I want to try is called a blind contour drawing. So what that's going to be is when we're going to look at our subject and we're going to use our eyes to follow the lines of the subject, our hand is going to follow along at the same time. So we're not going to be looking at our hand that has our drawing implement. So I'm not looking over here. I'm looking at the subject and I'm following the line of that my eyes are following as I go around it. Kashafa, how does that sound? Does that make sense?
Yes, that sounds good. There's a quick question.
Sure.
In the chat. What drawing tablet are you using?
I'm using a Wacom, I think it's just called the medium size Intuos line. So it's sort of the professional series. They have, I think they call it Bamboo, or they used to. I don't know if they still make them. That's the more introductory one. I've used like some introductory level drawing tablets as well, and they were perfectly fine. They did all the same basic features as long as it has that kind of pressure sensitivity. I'd say that's the key point. Some of them also do like tilt and other crazy things, which is nice to have, but it's not necessary. So I would say if you have like something basic, like an iPad Pro is way more than I think this could do. So any sort of drawing tablet will work.
Awesome,
how does that sound? Okay, so let's do a blind contour drawing. So what I'm going to do, so mine's a little weird because I've got my setup is sort of, I can see my reference image and my canvas at the same time. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep an eye on my reference image and try not to look at what I'm actually drawing. And I'm going to pick a point to start with. So I'm going to start at the top of that left pair, and I'm just going to not look at my drawing, and I'm just going to follow the curves. And it's not going to look great. And you can turn your brain off to the bit that says, oh, that's not how it looks. And you're just going to follow along and kind of go around it. And then you can also repeat lines and also sort of connect up the bits where you think like, oh, the stem is down here. So I'm going to try to follow my eyes around it and not worry too much about what it looks like. Then I'm going to come over here, and then I'm going to jump to the second pair. And then my eyes are going to the top and then following that stem and back down. So you're sort of drawing a continuous line. And here's interesting where they overlap, intersect. So I'm going to go into this area and just use your eyes to guide you, and don't worry about what it actually looks like on the page. I can tell my scale is way off just from my peripheral vision there. So just go around and then use this as sort of an introduction, because usually what we do is we are too hard on ourselves when it doesn't look exactly like what it does in real life. So the purpose of this is just to get your hand moving in coordination with your eyes. So how are people doing? Do people kind of have something that sort of looks nice and ugly like mine on the screen, something like that? Let's see. See if I can scroll down the chat here. People are doing okay? I can't see any comments yet. Maybe people are too busy drawing, which is great. So yeah, so don't be hard on yourself. Just kind of let your eyes do the drawing, and then just kind of your hand follows at the same, tries to follow at the same line. Oops.
Nicole's made a very good point that matching the lines back up is hard.
It is. So, okay, you can look, if you really want to like put that placement back, you can look at what you're drawing, put your pencil down, and then look back at what your subject. So just so you're not like drawing the same thing twice in two different places, you can go back in there. But yeah, this is not supposed to look like pretty.
Yeah, and there's another comment saying that your drawing is better, but that's subjective, I guess. Practice, there we go.
Yes, practice. I mean, yeah, it's, I can tell, like, when I was going, I was looking more closely at the one on the right, and it got really big, because as you pay more attention to something, suddenly you see more details and you start blowing things up in your mind. This is also kind of analogous to when we do like a scientific experiment. What we're really interested in is what's going on, and not what in our mind we already had the idea of what was going on. So it's sort of like investigating a still life or a drawing subject as if it were like a scientific experiment, like what's actually going on, what is there versus what do I think is there.
That's a really nice analogy.
Thanks. So how are people doing? Are we ready to move on to something else? Angry spaghetti, I love it. That's exactly what it should look like. You're doing well. Okay, so maybe as people finish up with that, I'm going to just create a new layer here. So what's nice about digital is I have layers, so I can just turn one off and turn another one back on. But if you're drawing at home, you can pick a new page. And then I think we're going to do we're going to draw the whole thing in 15 seconds, I think, or like quickly is the point. So the purpose of this exercise is so that, you know how sometimes you draw and you get like really into, like, say if I really like that pear on the left, I'll be like, oh, I really want to draw that. And I'll draw it like this. And then I realize that, hey, I have no more room for anything else on this piece of paper. So this is what prevents you from like starting something and then after you've put like a ton of work and detail into it, realizing that it doesn't fit your page. So this is something where you just want to also simplify because you don't have much time. So think about like geometric shapes, think about getting everything onto the page at the size you want. And it's a good sort of first step before you commit yourself into like a lot of detail and a lot of time, just to lay things out, see how things are, and then you can go in and correct from there. So I'm gonna clean up this layer. And then Kashifa, do you want to give us like a start and a countdown maybe?
Sure, give me 1 second then.
Sure,
Did
no
you
problem,
say,
whenever you're
so
ready.
15 seconds?
Yeah, and you can just count down
Okay.
like the last 5 or something, or whatever you feel like. So give us a go whenever you're ready.
Okay, so I'll just give everyone a couple of seconds to get ready. If your pencil's ready, then I'll count down, say go, and then I'll say time's up. Okay, 3, 2, 1.
Okay, start on the left here. Let's do that as like a circle, and then it comes out a bit, and I think I exaggerated that too much, and now my zoom window's
Okay, that's
away.
10 seconds.
Whoa, what? Okay.
And
that
that's
one.
it.
Oh, wow.
That's
Okay,
it.
that was super fast. Okay, maybe I should have given more time for that.
15.
Okay, so yeah, you can see, again, not supposed to look great, just supposed to get like layout going. So you can see I'm too far over to the right. I still don't have enough space in between here. So the advantage of digital is like, hey, I could just move this if I wanted to. But if you're at home, it would also help you sort of plan out where things need to be. So I would say maybe give yourself more than 15 seconds. That was probably ambitious. But the point is to really simplify, to do it quickly, and to sort of get the spaces planned out. So it's a good first step when you're doing a drawing. I would say you don't need to be so strict about the time when you're doing it at home on your own. But yeah, just to get things laid out on the page, it's a good introduction. So let's try something else. So the next exercise I had in mind, maybe I'll just leave this. So let me create a new layer.
Derek, could we do a question and a comment?
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's a comment from Facebook saying that it looks like Dolly drew your last drawing.
Yes.
It's great.
I'll take that as a compliment, sure.
Yeah. And there's a question saying, do we use the tip of the pencil or the side of the pencil?
Right. So for now, I would say use the tip, because right now what we're really concentrating on is like line. So we want just a really clean outline is what we're focusing on at the moment. I would say use the side of the pencil more. We're going to do like a more developed drawing later. And then I would say you can use the side when you want to get different qualities of line. Like if you use the side, maybe get a thicker line, or maybe it's more diffuse. And then also the last stage we'll do is we'll start doing some like tones and shading. And then you can use the side of your pencil too much. But I just want to caution people against, like, you can do too much sometimes when you do that. And you can also start to get that effect like it's a rubbing almost, like where you like lay a pencil or a crayon flat down against a textured surface and then you go across it to get the texture of something underneath it. Sometimes that helps your drawing, sometimes it doesn't. So just be careful of that. So I would say the best thing right now is use the tip of the pencil. Okay.
Great, thanks.
Good question, though. And then, yeah, we're going to get into that. So the next idea I had was to do something. Again, we're still training our eyes and hands to work together. So I'm just going to zoom in on my illustration here, and I'm actually going to switch colors because I'm not going to be doing a drawing. I'm just going to be demonstrating. So the next project or a little exercise I want us to do is to look at the negative space. So by that, I mean the space around and between the objects and not the objects themselves. And again, what this helps us do is it helps us to visualize what's actually there. Because if you draw the space around something, sometimes we don't have as strong an idea of what that should look like. And if we get all the spaces right, that means that the actual like positive object that we're drawing should come out in pretty good proportion. It's also a good trick you can use as you're drawing to sort of flip between what you're perceiving. Are you looking at the positive space or the negative space? And that will help you keep your proportions in line. But I should also probably explain what I mean by negative space. So hopefully you can see my reference image here. So instead of drawing the outline of the pear, I should move my layer so you can actually see it. I'm going to draw like the space between the pairs. So I'm a little off because my screen isn't aligned with my tablet right now. But so I would be drawing like this space here. So it's sort of like hourglass shaped with curved edges, like this. So that's the space that I would really want to pay attention to. Or this is a nice sort of enclosed space here. So I would be drawing like what does this area look like between the stem of one pear and the side of another, or like this triangle, like what's the shape of this triangle? How far does it go? So does that make sense? So we're sort of looking at the spaces around and between objects. So this is why we suggested you get multiple objects, because if you have one thing on its own, you can still do it, but it's a little bit harder. So should we try that? And then Kashva, maybe I'll have you give us maybe 5 minutes on this.
Sounds good.
If that works for time. So I'm going to change my pen again to something you can see. Hopefully that looks good. Okay, so let's jump in. And then, yeah, scale is always an issue. So let's try drawing that shape between those two pairs on the left there. Kind of looks like this, narrows down here. I probably exaggerated that curve too much. Yeah, and if anyone has any questions, feel free to jump in as well. Or if you just want to concentrate on what you're drawing, that's cool too. And then, yeah, there's sort of like, then it also helps if your background isn't super busy when you're doing this and you're not trying to look at pattern and texture. Like mine has a bit of reflection in the photo, but I think I can deal with that. Okay, and then I probably drew this too big because I'm probably going to run out of room on the right. But what does that shape look like there? Then that's kind of, but the rectangle's a bit wider. Yeah, I'm definitely going to run out of room. Okay, I might cheat and scale this down a bit, but. Okay, pretend you don't see this bit. Just gonna make that smaller. And we're gonna go around. And then where's that bit? That bit's up here. And then, yeah, my eyes are sort of on like, what does the shape of that wall look like? Because it's kind of, oh, that bit just comes straight into the pear. That curves around. Let's fill it in more. Huh, that curve is probably wider. So you can also, you feel free to go in and erase. Never be afraid of your eraser. It's your helpful friend there. Yeah, so this bit's definitely not that high. I find this is a problem when I draw digitally is that scale is always difficult because you don't have those like edges of the paper to keep you fenced in. So I always end up going too far, too big. Let's see, what does the shape around the end of the stem look like? It's like a little uneven. And then...
Just wanted to say we're about halfway in our 5-minute mark.
Okay, that feels like a good amount of time.
Okay.
Probably should have given us more for that quick drawing, but now we know. Yeah, and then if someone picks something like a house plant, you probably gave yourself like a huge challenge there to go around all the leaves and stuff, but do what you can. And then I'm going to straighten that up. So it's really challenging sometimes not to draw like shadows or to draw the texture that's going on. It depends what you like. I tend to be someone who likes to draw like tones and to get into shape and all of that, but to keep yourself just to line can be challenging. So it takes a bit of discipline sometimes.
Okay, we've got about 30 more seconds.
That sounds perfect. That probably comes in a bit lower there.
Okay, so a couple more seconds till 5 o'clock mark. Okay, so it looks like
Good?
it's 5 minutes according to my timer. But
okay, great. I feel like I'm good with this.
Okay,
Hopefully other
awesome.
people are too. Can't see the chat window, so don't really know. But yeah, so if people are feeling kind of warmed up, they've gotten sort of used to letting what they're seeing guide what they're drawing. What I was going to do is to have us, how much time do we have left actually? What time are we supposed to wrap up? I forget.
Well, it's 1:35.
Yeah.
So
like 15 more minutes?
10, yeah, that's
10, 15?
that sounds good. Yeah.
Okay.
Just one more thing. There is a comment saying that was hard.
That was hard. Yeah. It's like, see the opposite of what you usually see.
Yeah.
It's a brain thing. So yeah, but if you practice at it, it gets easier and easier. So it's something to keep up and sort of, you can also use it just for like really constrained areas. Like, the space that's between at the top where I was drawing there between the two pairs. Maybe that's where it's most useful. And then for other places, maybe just do your regular outline. So it's something that can be used judiciously, but it's also a good sort of exercise to practice. So with our remaining time, what I thought we would do was split it in half and then work on the same drawing all the way through. But for the first half, focus just on line. So we're just going to be doing outline and proportion, and I'll show you some tricks for correcting proportion and getting that looking good. And then for the second half, then we'd start looking at form and shape and pattern and emphasis and rhythm and stuff like that. So hopefully everyone is good to follow along with that. So I'm going to, I'm going to create a new layer here, because what I could do is use one of the existing ones, but that's not fair if people are drawing on paper, because then you can't do it as easily. So I'm going to start again. And then, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to generate just a fairly light line drawing. So if you're using a set of drawing pencils, go ahead and use something like in the HB to H range. And I'm going to get just the outlines down for everything. And I'm going to do it fairly quickly, not quite 15 seconds, but fairly quickly. And then I'm going to start working on proportions after that. So maybe I will just jump in. Feel free to go ahead as well. And I'm going to change my opacity, because right now, last time I was at like 80 or 90%. Now I'm going to be at 60% or something. So my lines are going to be a little lighter. And this will make it easier to erase. So if you're drawing at home off the pencil, don't press as hard, and it'll do the same effect. And let me jump back to where I had a clean layer there. So I'm going to start at one end, work my way across. Generally, because I'm right-handed, I start on the left side and go to the right. You can do the opposite if you're left-handed. It's a way to keep from smudging your drawing. Also, if you have like a second piece of paper you can put under your hand, after we start getting into more line work or more shading, then that'll prevent your hand from smudging it. So pick up one of those if you don't already have one around. So I'm going to start at the left there, and I'm going to sort of use a combination of the things that we were doing. So I'm sort of looking at the object and letting my hand follow the shape. So sort of like a blind contour, except I'm actually looking at what I'm drawing, because now I care a little bit more about having this like in the right spot and looking a little more like it actually does. And I'm taking fairly short strokes and sort of blending them together. So I know that this bit of the pear lines up, but I also know that there's a bit that projects forward. So I'm going to sketch that in. I think it's a bit wonky. So I'm going to make that look a little, make that look a little more balanced. So yeah, keep your strokes fairly light here. Don't be afraid of erasing. And also, I was doing this thing, and now I'm getting like way too detailed before I get my other things in there, and that's a good way of running out of space, because I probably didn't leave enough room at the top. Let's see. So I'm going to pretend like I can't just adjust my canvas, and I'm going to move this down. So I'm going to basically transpose this a bit further down the page, and rather than start from scratch, I'm going to use my existing shape to do it. So this is going to look a little weird for a little bit. Then I'm going to erase my old one, and then you'll see why I did that.
I wanted to share something from the comments.
Yeah.
Mike is saying that something that he picked up from the author of Mouse, the artist, Art Spiegelman, is use a light color pen to darker. I'm assuming like colors like yellow, orange, red, blue, as opposed to just like lighter strokes. Or Mike, let me know if I got the gist of your comment wrong. But I think that's really interesting.
That's if you're illustrating with pen, maybe, not like pencil or anything.
That's right. That's right.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that's a good general principle overall, especially when you're working with something like pen or watercolor. Because I do watercolors, always sort of go light to dark, because you can never lighten it up again. So yeah, I would say that's good advice. So yeah, follow that. Okay, and then if I move that down, then I should see sort of where that curve relates. So now I'm kind of looking at that negative space that I'm drawing, the space between them, because I want to get both the spacing right and sort of where the curves align. So I'm looking at my reference image, and I'm seeing the horizontal line between the bottom of this pair and the one on the left, sort of where that notch is in the outline where this comes in. That sort of lines up with the bottom of this one. So I'm looking at how those shapes relate to each other, even though they're not like interconnected, just how they relate in terms of vertical and horizontal space. So that's one way of keeping things relatively in proportion. And again, I'm off my digital paper here, although I'm probably getting too big is the other thing. So one thing I can do, you can do this using your hands or using the end of your pencil. Like you see people doing this thing. And what they're doing is I'm going to draw a shape. I'm going to make it a different color so you can actually see what color it is. It's going to be white. So pretend this is your pencil. So you can sort of take your pencil and use it to measure how wide one of the objects is, and then use that to translate across to your other objects. So I can tell that this one on the left is bigger than the one in the middle, and the one on the right is even bigger than that. But also you can sort of flip it and go take that same proportion and use it vertically. So this is useful. I can tell like the one on the left is a tiny bit taller than it is wide, but it's pretty close. And it's about, oh, it's almost exactly the same as the one on the right. So this type of proportion is really useful when you're drawing, because sometimes as you're going through, your sense of scale changes, or it does with me at least. So let's get out of this, go back to our drawing. And that's something that you can do with parts of the drawing. And so like take different measurements at different points and go back and forth. So that one I was doing on the right is probably way too big. Let's see. Oops, I should go back to a brush. That's in a color you can see. Because yeah, that curve kind of comes in before the top of that one, and then it goes up. So I should change the way that looks here. Kind of a lazy erase. And you can see I'm drawing this middle one as if I could see the whole thing, which I can't, but just to get like the line where it disappears here to match up with where it reappears here. Sometimes it helps to draw it continuously through, but that's why you don't want to do it too dark, because you're probably gonna have to erase it later. Okay, give myself more space. Okay, and then for this one, I can come in here and also try to avoid, at this stage, try to avoid doing a lot of shading, because we want to work on proportion first before we get into that. I'll make this a little bigger, just so it's easier for me to see. Yeah, I think before that one was way too big. So let's go in here again. Kind of curious what people are drawing at home. So maybe if you've got a second, go into the chat, give us an idea of what you've got in front of you. Maybe I can be more specific then also what kind of tips I give.
Nicole's saying she's drawing an avocado with a jalapeno.
Ah, nice. That sounds delicious.
Richard is drawing a clock, which is great.
I also wanted to share a comment from earlier that
Sure.
Margaret had said that she had never done a negative space drawing before and found it very interesting.
Oh, cool.
There's a clay pitcher in a bowl, and I'm doing three, and that's from, who's that? Sorry, Tanis. And Celine's doing a cup, and I'm doing 3 hot cross buns.
Ooh. That sounds great. I think some nice textures going on. There's like some things that are shiny, some things that are matte, some things that are more like have like a wrinkled surface. So those are all challenges.
That's a good point. Yeah, I hadn't thought of the shiny reasons.
Yeah, so that's gonna come up to, or that'll be something that's important when we start doing like shading, like tones and texture. Right now, for outlines, I think everyone's okay. Just sort of pay attention to the outline. When we start looking at surface texture, then we're gonna start to, that's gonna be interesting. Then I'll try to gear it towards shiny things versus matte things versus like really rough textured things. But everything comes back to observation at the end. If you're paying attention to what's in front of you and drawing what you actually see, you can draw anything at that point. You don't need like a formula. You're good to go. So at this point, I'm kind of looking at negative space because I want to get that angle right. And if I look at if I look at the stem, then I'm going to try to draw like the texture of the stem what I really want is to get that relationship between the two objects, sort of the curve at the top versus the curve at the middle. You can see I'm drawing a whole bunch of lines. I should erase some of them so I can actually pick one, because I want it, that shape is not parallel. It's sort of more narrow towards there, and then it widens out. So I'm trying to get that right. Let's see. Catchfa, how are we doing on time?
I was just about to say it's 1:46.
Is that about our halfway mark?
Sort of.
Sort of.
So I think we're running a little bit behind schedule.
Are we? Okay. Okay, I'll pick it up then. So one of the tips would be to not rush past this point where you have something like a rough outline, because when you start adding like a lot of tones and texture, it's harder to change like an overall shape, and you're kind of reluctant to do it because then you've put all this work in. So I would say spend some time on this stage, when things are at this stage, just to go and check your proportions, check how everything relates to each other, and don't rush it. But in the interest of time, we're going to move on. So now we'll get into the idea of looking at surface texture and sort of getting more of a three-dimensional shape to our outline. So I'm just going to clean this up a little because this is going to interfere. We can actually, even when you just have an outline, you can still get into the idea of suggesting form and volume, and that's through things like the character and the weight of the line. So but what I mean by that is like a darker line is going to appear heavier. Like if I make this line at the bottom quite dark, I'll just exaggerate. You can see it's more like visually heavy. A lighter line will also look like it's receding or further back in the distance. Like if I make this line quite light and then say I increase the thickness of this line, then it's going to make it look like it's more in the foreground. And that's just how our eyes see, and also like a little bit of atmospheric perspective, but not really. Like the things that we pay more attention to look like they're closer to us than things that are further away. Also, if you could try doing like more jagged lines or more like smooth lines and see what that does, just to create different types of lines in your drawing, and that'll communicate different sort of emotions. So that's sort of getting into the more creative aspect. But in order to create volume, I'm going to do a few different techniques. So now we're going to start looking at the shadows on our shapes. So it's really important to understand what kind of light you have falling on your objects. So in the reference image I have, I've got, this is basically outside, so I've got like a large opening. It's not quite a window off to the left. So you can see that there's a strong light coming in from the left. You can see that there's a highlight. I'll zoom in. You can see there's a highlight here, and then there's a shadow in this area. But I'm going to go back one. There's also reflected light. So light is coming in, it's hitting somewhere in the middle, and I can see that there's a bit of a lighter area here, as well as some places like in here is not as dark as it would be if there weren't reflected light, as well as underneath here. So really pay attention to what the light is doing, and also how the light is interacting between your objects. If you have a shinier object, there's going to be a lot more interactions and a lot more sort of dark light, versus if you have like a matte or a more textured object, then it's going to not have as many sort of reflections that you're going to be able to pick up as easily. So how I'm going to show that on the drawing is on this one on the left, I'm going to do a technique that's called the following form. So this is where it really helps to have a three-dimensional object and not just like a photo reference, because then you can understand the three-dimensional shape of it. So I know the shape of a pear. So I'm going to follow as if I was sort of doing lines around the circumference of the pear. So I'm going to follow that curve, for instance, where I know it's darker, and I know that the darkest point is probably here as well as underneath. That's sort of a shadow on the table. And I'm going to keep all my lines, they're going to curve, but they're going to sort of line up with each other. So it's almost like you're shadowing or shading with thread or something. So by doing this, you create the sense of the three-dimensional form, even though you're doing it on like a more two-dimensional surface. And the surface of my objects are still fairly smooth, but they do have like little dots, but maybe I won't do that. Maybe I'll save that for another technique. So I'm going through here, and then this is the side that's in the light, but there are still shadows. So just because something is in the light doesn't mean it's at the absolute lightest, because that's sort of in this area here. So I am going to just go through there.
Derek, it's
Yep.
Nancy. I don't know if
Good.
this is helpful now, but Sheila, when she mentioned what she was drawing a glass sponge with way too many pores in it, and she was
Ooh.
wondering how to draw that. Anyway, it's a
Oh,
texture
that
thing.
is challenging. Yeah, okay, so maybe I'll do something that'll help Sheila right now. So this one on the right, I'm going to stipple. So that is where you make little dots using your pencil or your pen, whatever you're using. And this could help with a glass sponge, because a glass sponge looks like a sponge. It has a whole bunch of little holes. So if you can do a technique that sort of mimics the texture of the object that you're drawing, that'll help. I'm gonna cheat a bit and make my, there, hopefully you can see that better. I just made my brush a bit bigger. You can do this if you're using a pencil, you can use a softer lead or maybe not as sharp a point. And then you can go in here and then you can sort of combine techniques. So instead of doing like a completely random pattern of dots, I can also sort of pretend that there are sort of these longitudinal lines going down, and then also increase the density and the darkness of your dots where there are more shadows. So you can sort of mix and match. There's also, so this is interesting because there's the shadow, but there's also like scratches on my hair at the same time. So I'm gonna do little dashes in there. But as a general rule, you don't want to mix like too many techniques in a single drawing. Like if I were gonna stipple for like a drawing that I was going to spend a lot of time on and I wanted to like present somewhere, I would just do all one technique. So I would do like all stippling, or I would do all sort of following the form lines and not mix it up too much, because that looks a little haphazard sometimes. But once you've practiced enough, then go crazy. Then you do you. But
So Sheila's, oh, sorry.
Yep,
So Sheila's saying thank you, Derek. And Linda's asking, do you choose either negative or positive space when drawing, or do you use both, depending on what you're drawing?
Most of the time I would do positive space, just because I think it is easier because you sort of have to wrap your head around the negative space a little more. I will use negative space, for instance, where I was doing like this space here to get the shape of the space in between two objects. So I will sort of use it for very focused, like I just need this one area to look good. I'm going to use negative space as like a little trick I can pull out of my bag, which is going to help me make that area look a little more accurate. So yeah, I would say you can use all those techniques that we looked at and just know what the most appropriate place would be to use each one, maybe. Yeah, so you can see stippling takes a lot more time because you're in here and you're sort of building things up. And yeah, it's something that if you rush it, it's going to look pretty bad probably, because you'll be able to tell where you took shortcuts. But yeah, this is another technique. And when you go through, if you're going through like a art gallery or maybe like art galleries collections online, it can be fun to sort of look at the different techniques that people are using. Once you have sort of these things and once you've done them yourself, then you can sort of appreciate how artists are using the different techniques to communicate and to create different works of art and create different sorts of emotions and feelings within their work just by these different qualities of line and different techniques. Okay, so I'm gonna do a third technique on this middle one, and I'm gonna do one that's called hatching or cross hatching. So this is where you're doing lines. You're also kind of following the form. I'm not gonna make these perfectly straight because that might flatten out my object, but I am also going to go in sort of the opposite direction, or like 90 degrees. And then this is gonna build up the idea of shadow and shape within the form as well. This is something that you see a lot in like etching or different types of printmaking. And then this one also has like I don't know, a scratch, what would you call this, on the skin. And I'm gonna follow the same type of shading technique within an object. So I'm gonna render this scratch using a little bit of cross hatching, since that's what I've already chosen to go with. Oh, and I can see my proportions are off because I don't have enough space between this stem and where that scratch is. So yeah, that's somewhere where I should have spent more time working on proportions and outline before going in here. But you know, time. And I'm going to do the same type of cross hatching in here. And this is a bit faster than the stippling, especially when you have different media to work with. And then, yeah, I want to avoid making this part on the bottom right too dark because I know that there's some reflected light coming up there. And I also, well, since before I was making that example of the line work, that created a bit dark. You can also go in here and, like I'm using my eraser to lighten things up. And then when you erase, you can also like erase in a crosshatch pattern, and that will help sort of maintain what you've got rather than starting from complete scratch. So we are at, ooh, it's 1:56. How are people feeling? That was probably, it's been an hour, hasn't it? So
Both
anyone...
Sheila and Linda said thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, no worries. Does anyone have any other questions, or people feel free to, people feel more enabled to go home, or you are home probably, everyone's home. Go somewhere, maybe go outdoors, go to your backyard, do some drawing, maybe outside, give you some motivation, help you develop your techniques, use your imagination out there.
We have a few positive comments. Xupeng has said that she didn't feel like time passed at all.
Oh, nice.
Great demo. Yeah, lots of thank yous from Linda, Richard, Wendy. Wendy says, would love more webinars like this. And I just wanted to add that we do have a survey for this. I'll put the slide up at the end. So if you do have feedback for the kind of future sessions you'd like, you can leave your feedback there.
Yeah, let us know what you'd want to see. Like if you want more like demos, what kind of demos, what would be useful. Cool. So Kashf, I don't know if you had anything else, sort of outro or anything, or if we should just...
I just had the link for the survey that I mentioned and any last questions that people have. And then just some information about the next session as well. So yeah, whenever you're done, if we can switch back, I just have some slides to show.
Sure, take it away.
Okay, sounds good. So would it be okay if we then stop sharing your screen?
Yeah, can you grab it, or do I have to like specifically stop on my end?
I think I can do that. Okay, excellent. And then I can share my own screen. Okay, excellent. So I did just want to mention that if you'd like to support the museum, especially at this time, you can purchase a membership, and you can also, of course, donate. Those are some links for that. And then our next session is going to be the same time next Wednesday. It's going to be about the marine invertebrate. It's going to be about marine invertebrate research. There's a link on here, as well as a link on the website and the Facebook page. And the last part is the survey. So bit.ly/Beaty survey. You can go there and share your feedback. And if you like this session, you can ask for more. So that's it. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Does anyone have any last questions before we wrap up?
No one's typing yet, but I have one, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sure, Nancy.
So my question is that we actually had a workshop from about teaching sketching, and they were, you said the eraser is your friend, and they're very adamant about not letting the kids have erasers, at least until not the very, very end, if ever, because I guess it wastes time and they're scratching the paper and those kinds of things. So I don't know if you had any comments about that.
Yeah, I can see an argument for not relying on the eraser, especially when you're starting, because then it depends why you're erasing. Like if you're erasing just because you don't think it looks good in your mind based on like that internal critic, then that's not great. So yeah, so I could see that being an exercise like you're not allowed to erase. But I think once you have a level of comfort and you know specifically, like if you're just changing like, oh, I know this line is too long or too high, if you're doing that kind of adjustment, I think then it's cool to use an eraser. But if you're doing like, no, I don't like this, I have to start again, just for like an arbitrary reason, then that's not the best. So I think the eraser is something you can build up to as a tool later, but I think, yeah, definitely at some point you need an eraser.
Okay, thank you. Team Mike says he's on team not erase as well.
Okay, that could be polarizing.
Maggie says she tried to draw a tomato and it looks like a pencil sharpener. Yeah.
I want to see that.
Yeah.
It could be a tomato-shaped pencil sharpener.
And Arlene said hers is much better than she thought it would be. So yeah, we
Yeah,
really
that's
enjoyed it.
wonderful. Yeah, so I think, yeah, practice that idea that you draw what's in front of you and not what you think it should look like.
Awesome. So it is two, actually it's just past 2, so I guess we'll start wrapping it up. Unless there's any last questions. Nancy, can you see any?
Have we recorded
in the
this?
chat, or-
Yes, so it has, oh yeah, so you can find the video on our Facebook page, so it should be
Yes.
there. If not right now, then in a bit. And just Mike wanted to say, as a teacher, kids erase fully rather than produce
Right.
a specific purpose, like Derek
Yes.
did.
Okay, in that case, take away the erasers. So you don't need to have a Facebook account in order to watch the live stream again on Facebook. So you can just go to our page and it should just play. You don't need to log in or anything. And I think those are all the questions that I see.
Awesome.
How about you?
Yeah.
There we go. Okay. So is there anything, any last thing you'd like to share, Derek?
Keep drawing. It's a good way to pass the time at home, develop new skills. I would love to see your work, so please share it and hashtag it with Beaty Museum. And yeah, reach out to us if you have any questions. Thanks so much for joining us today.